All right, so we're finally starting Inventor, and for a lot of you, I know that's going to be an exciting thing. A couple things before we actually jump into it. We are still working on getting Inventor loaded on all your student ThinkPads. Some of you have it, most of you do not. It's been a slower process than I thought, but we will kind of work through that. Some of you will work on your ThinkPad, those who already have the software loaded. The rest will work on the desktops. It's the same install of the software, the process or the direction that we go through will be the same no matter which type of computer you are using. So let's jump into it, and if you have any questions, we'll talk about those at the end. We're starting with the Puzzle Cube project, which is a good starting point because of the shapes being fairly simple. I know some of you may have already used the software, but this might be a good way to refresh or learn maybe the proper way of doing some of the things that we're going to do. The first thing that we do with any new project that we're going to start is to actually set up a project. Right? So if I click on projects, it's going to bring up this window. Within this window, I want to click to make a new project. Typically, we're going to do single user projects because we have not set up a vault or a server at the school that would allow you to set up any other type. So all the projects, even if you're working with a partner, will be single user projects. Click next. I'm going to title it, so for this it'll be Puzzle Cube, or whatever else you choose to call it. And then I have to specify where this is going to be saved. So I'm going to click here to browse. I'm going to save mine on the desktop. For your ThinkPad, I would suggest doing it in your documents. If you're using one of my desktops, I would suggest the H drive. So I'm going to do it on the desktop. I'm going to click Make a New Folder. I'll also call this Puzzle Cube. Okay, now I want to check, okay, this project's going to save to my desktop in a folder called Puzzle Cube. That's all good, I'll hit finish. Notice now that my check mark in the projects is next to Puzzle Cube, which means that anything that I save or open up automatically will come from or go into this folder. If I need to switch between the project that I'm currently on, I simply double click and the check mark will move. And now that I set up my project, I'm going to start a new part file. We looked at the different types of parts files and extensions. So a part file has an extension of .ipt. And before we can assemble anything, in this case the Puzzle Cube project, we have to build all the parts or each of the 5 individual pieces. So I'm going to click on New, and I'm going to click standard.ipt or standard part file and hit create. Notice that it's set to my Puzzle Cube project. Okay, so before we actually start building anything, I did want to talk a little bit about the user interface so that you have some familiarity with the terms that I'm using when we're talking about them. Starting in the top left-hand corner, this little eye is called the application icon. This is where you would find the common things like new, open, save, print, and stuff like that. This is common to a lot of ribbon-based software. So if you use, let's say, Microsoft Word, it would have a similar setup. Next to the eye is called the quick access toolbar. So these are the commonly used things. A lot of them would be the same as what's in here. Undo, redo, save, open, home. This is where our materials are and colors when we add those to our pieces. Below that is called the ribbon. And the ribbon is kind of broken up into different parts. We have our tabs. So I'm on the 3D model tab, sketch tab, inspect tab. And then within the tabs, you have what are called panels. So this is the create panel. This is the modify panel. And then within each individual panel, you would have the commands. So like the whole command, fillet command, chamfer command. Okay. This right here is called the browser. This browser is critical for kind of processing what we've done and checking, if we come into a mistake, where that would be. So it's kind of like a roadmap of every step or every command we've done since opening the program, kind of displays here in our browser. And we'll get into some of those details a little bit later. The main part of the screen here, gray background, is our graphics window display. So when we do the modeling or drawing, this is where that shows up. This is my navigation cube and my home button. So this is to view the different parts of my object. Right now there's nothing drawn, so if I switch this, you're not necessarily going to notice a difference on my display. But when we build things, that piece or that object would rotate. And then finally I have my navigation bar. So this is where I find my navigation tools like zooming in, zooming out. If I want to orbit that piece, These are all in here, and we'll get into using these in a little bit. All right, so before we actually draw anything, there are a couple settings that I want you to change, and it's kind of a one-time setup, so once you do it, you won't have to do it again. But I'm going to go into the Tools tab, and from there I'm going to click on Application Options. I want to go to the Sketch tab, and I want to turn on Grid Lines. What that's going to do is going to add a grid anytime I'm in sketch mode. And it's a good way to know, okay, now I'm sketching, or now I'm working on as a 3D model. So having that turned on would be a good idea. On the part, I like to turn on the Display Extended Information after Feature, Node Name, and Browser, and I'll show you why in a little bit. So go ahead and just check that on, so that is on there. And then finally, under Display, I like to reverse the zoom behavior because it is the opposite of what you would think it would be, meaning the zoom wheel on your mouse. If you would scroll up, it would go the opposite direction than you would normally think. So I like to reverse that direction, and so that we all basically have the same setup. So those three things I want you to turn on, hit apply, and it's kind of a one-time setup. So now those are on, those will stay on. So let's talk about the process then of creating our first part. So the first piece that makes up our Puzzle Cube project, on the 3D Model tab, I'm going to click Start 2D Sketch, because everything we do in Inventor will start with a two-dimensional sketch and then be manipulated to make a three-dimensional object. So it always starts 2D and then becomes 3D. So I'm starting a 2D sketch. Once I click on that, it gives me my X, Y, YZ, and XZ plane to draw on. Doesn't necessarily matter which one you select. Typically though, we would want to select the XY plane. The XY plane would be where the front view of our object would be. So I'm going to click on this XY plane. Notice that I have the grid lines up. It tells me that I'm in sketch mode. I'm going to be sketching. Notice too that the ribbon has changed. So the tools on my ribbon are now different. So for right now, I'm just going to focus on what would be the process for making one cube, one of our puzzle cube pieces. Okay? The cube itself is 3/4 by 3/4, so we'll use that size, that dimension as we're doing the drawings. I'm going to work off of the origin. It's important to have one point always referenced to the origin of my drawing, and I'm going to add the dimensions as I go. So I'm going to be going directly up, and I want it to be 0.75 inches. Go directly to the right, 0.75. So that would be the size of the front face of my cube. If I'm happy with that sketch, I'm going to finish the sketch. And I'm going to use the extrude command to turn that two-dimensional sketch into a 3D object. The distance for my extrusion is 0.75. So now I have a 3D object based on my two-dimensional sketch. Notice now when I'm using my view cube, it does, as I'm moving this, change within the browser. The home button takes me back to my home view. So I use the line command and dimensions to create this cube. But let me back up and use maybe a different tool to do the same process. Okay, so instead of using lines, I'm going to use a rectangle command to make the same cube. So I'm clicking on rectangle. I start the first corner on the origin, and I'm going to type the dimensions as I'm going. So 0.75, and I can use the tab button to switch between dimensions, and then do 0.75 again. I hit enter, and it gets me to the same spot. Instead of using lines, I use the rectangle to make that. Finish the sketch, and then again use the extrude command. So that would be the process of using line and rectangle to make one of these cubes. From here, I could build directly on this cube by starting a new two-dimensional sketch. So if I want to create a sketch, let's say on the top of this, start 2D sketch, select this surface. Again, the grid lines are back. It tells me I'm back in sketch mode. I'm now drawing again. I'm going to use a rectangle to draw on top of this surface. It's important that I snap to the edges. I don't have to set any dimensions because it's using the dimensions from my previous sketch and previous object, and finish. And then I can extrude again and again. If I want one cube sitting on top of one, I can do the 0.75. In this case though, my puzzle cube piece is going to be 3 cubes tall. So instead of doing just one and then having to sketch again, why not do both at the same time? So I can either double the number, 1.5, Or software actually will understand, like if you don't want to do the math, I can do 0.75 times 2, and it'll understand what I mean by that. Hit OK. So ideally, I would want to probably have drawn the original square and extruded that 3. Instead of doing 2 separate extrusions, I could have done it all as one process. Okay? I'm going to continue sketching on this to build my first puzzle cube piece. Again, I'll use the rectangle command. 0.75, the tab button allows me to switch to the other dimension. I can switch back and forth. Enter, finish the sketch, extrude this out. This will be just the 0.75. And I'll sketch on either of the 2 faces to complete my piece. So 0.75, tab, 0.75. Finish my sketch and use the extrude command. Use my view cube to switch sides. Now I'm looking at the left side of my object. Sketch on this face, using again the rectangle. 0.75, 0.75. I think I actually completed the rectangle, so let me go ahead and add that in. Right, now it's there, finish my sketch. Click extrude, 0.75. So this is the first of my puzzle cube pieces. I could have built this probably a bunch of different ways, right? I could have probably built a lot of this all in one sketch. Like if I were to draw kind of the profile down here, I could have extruded all that at one time, so that would have been one extrusion. And then on the top of that, built it again. I built this piece and extruded it up. So ideally, I could reduce the amount of time spent on this by minimizing the number of extrusions I have to do, but however you want to tackle this, since this is the first time, is okay with me. If I want to use all lines and do 1 cube at a time, that's fine. If I want to use lines that build larger parts of my profile at one time, that's fine as well. Last step for this then is to change the color. And I want to use the colors that you guys came up with for your designs. So I like to use this little color wheel. I mean, we could set a material and make it wood, but for right now, let's just keep it generic. I'm going to use this little adjust thing. I'd like to select one of the surfaces, and I can adjust the color. Okay, so let's say I want this to be blue. And the type of blue is completely up to you. Right? So let's say I want it to be blue. Let's make this first surface blue, and if I want to make the entire object blue, I have to hover over it until the entire thing is outlined. I'm going to left click and then hit the check mark. Notice that it's actually doing tonal shading. Notice at the top is a little bit lighter than this side and this side here. And so like what we were doing by hand, it also does in the software as well. So this piece is done. I'm going to click the little save icon. Notice that it went automatically into my puzzle cube folder, which is what I want because of the fact that I set up the project first. I'm going to call this my blue part and hit save. Now that I'm done with this piece, I need to build the next and eventually all 5 of my parts. And to do that, I'm going to start a new standard.ipt and then start my process all over again. So to complete this first part, I need everybody to build the 5 parts that are part of their puzzle cube design. Make sure that you have each of the 5 parts in the same puzzle cube folder. And then from there, we'll talk about what the process is for creating the assembly of the actual cube.